this image is blown up twice the size. And so whenever you're doing measuring and plotting, the first thing you have to do is format your paper so it's either exactly 2 times or 3 times the size. And so what I mean by that is if you got a ruler and you measured this length, it would fit in twice this way. And then if I measured this length, it would fit in perfectly twice this way. So you have to always make sure that your drawing paper is exactly 2 times or 3 times or 4 times the size of your initial reference photo. Some kids don't get that and they draw on an awkward size sheet of paper and then this won't work. The whole method falls apart. Just like how if you're doing a grid drawing, the box needs to be twice or 3 times the size. The nice thing about the measuring and plotting method is as you get more and more advanced with your skills, you can use less and less dots. And so this really helps you with scale. So let's say that you're really good at freehanding, but you want it to take up the same composition. So you want it to look exactly like this. You can end up measuring and plotting just a couple of dots, and then you'll know, okay, the eye is about this size, and then you freehand the rest of it. I want you to measure and plot every single one of these because I want to make sure that you know how to do this. If you don't, you can go ahead and use a QR code with your phone. You just grab your phone if you have an iPhone, or I don't know what you do, maybe with an Android it does the same thing, I'm not sure. But if you put your photos on and you go over to the QR code, it pops up for YouTube and you can click on that and then watch the demonstration from there. So this QR code is the QR code for this worksheet. This is about how to format paper, and so you're going to need these QR codes for the future when you have your own reference photo and your own awkward size of drawing paper. And this is how to measure and plot again, but with a normal photo on normal paper. And so if you're confused, you can watch that QR code demonstration as well. All right, so this dot is already done for you. And so you can, if you get confused and you want to see if you're doing it right, you can always measure that distance down and see how 1, 2, it fits in perfectly that way. And then 1, we go 1, 2, and it fits in perfectly that way. So all we're really doing is taking the important parts and doubling those distances because this is 2 times the size, right? And so I am going to go ahead and start with this next dot. I'm going to show you how to do it with a pencil. I'm going to show you how to do it with a measuring stick, or if you don't have that, just a regular sheet of paper. The measuring stick or the sheet of paper is going to be more accurate than using your pencil, but let's start with the pencil because you all have one. If you have a regular sheet of paper, grab that and have that ready for the next part. So go ahead and do this with me. We're starting here. I don't normally draw these lines on the paper. I just measure how far down it is and how far over it is. I normally go the shortest distance, so I would go that distance and this distance. But you could have measured how high up it is and how far over it is. It doesn't really matter, but you have to go down or up and from one direction from the side or the other. So I take my pencil and I'm lining up my thumb right on the edge of the box. Not this part of my thumb, but my thumbnail. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to line my thumbnail up on this part too. But some kids are like, well, where? Is it here? Is it like how far over? It doesn't matter. You just have to have it lined up on the edge of the box. And then you rotate your hand, you go that distance once. Let me make a better dot. And then you go down to the dot. Your thumb will now be against the edge of that dot, and you go twice. On that second mark, you extend it parallel to what you measured from, which is that edge. Some kids get confused and they start connecting the dots and going the wrong way. So if you're doing this wrong, it's because you're extending it the wrong direction. I measured from this line. My thumb was resting against this line, so the line has to go that way. At first, this method is going to be like weird if you've never done it before. But it's like driving a car where all of a sudden it's not hard anymore, right? You barely think about what you're doing because you're so good with it. And that's what this is going to be like too. So if you haven't done it already, You're measuring that distance, and then you're going 1, 2, and then extending it out horizontal. If you are not having your face directly up above looking down, it's going to cause a little bit of a problem for you because of perspective, your point of view. So make sure you're looking straight down as you're doing this. For me, it's a little hard because there's a big camera inside in the way. And then you're going to measure, and I'm marking it, not this part of my thumb, but somewhere I know where I'm marking it on my thumb, there. And then you're lining it up anywhere on here, and you're going that distance once, making that mark, putting your thumb up against that mark, and twice. On the second mark, I'm extending it out vertically, and I extend them out so much that they cross. So wherever the two lines cross, that is 100% accurate of where your dot is going to be. So no guessing on that one. The first dots that you put on there are all unnecessary dots. They're just, at this point, they're just helping me get to the second dot. And I can erase all of my excess lines. And then I'm going to look at that curve, and I'm going to draw that very first line. It's a good idea to connect the dots as you go, because otherwise some kids will have like a ton of dots on the page and they don't remember what dot represented what dot. So then I would go to the next one over here so that I can connect that part of the line. So we're playing connect the dots. I'm going to show you this one. You can continue to use your pencil if you want, if you don't have a piece of paper. I'm going to show you how to use this as a measuring stick. Some kids try to break out a ruler, and that's just going to be a little bit more confusing. So I would not do that, okay? So I'm going to measure this one. I'm going to put, and you can put the lines on there if you want to. I prefer not doing that because then it hides the detail underneath and it makes it harder to see. So now I'm going to take the tip of my paper, pretend that's the tip of my pencil, put that into the middle of the dot, and then mark the edge of the page. So if you haven't done this dot yet, just skip and start with me. And so I mark the edge of the box. I line it up. Remember, it doesn't matter where on the line, but this and this have to be lined up. And then I put the dot at the very tip of the page, and that's once. So it's right there. Slide it, line it up with the dot, twice. And so my first dot means nothing. My second dot needs to be extended. Some kids, again, they try to extend it out this way because they're like, oh, there's another dot. Let me connect it. No, it's opposite of that way. So I measured off of this line, so it has to extend out this way. Then I can forget about all the rest and then measure the second way. If you don't measure both ways, basically that means that you know that it's this far down, but you don't know exactly how far over it is, and so that's why you have to measure the second way. So tip of the paper on the dot, mark the edge of the box. It's lined up on this edge, so that vertical edge. I can put it anywhere I want. Logically, it's going to be in line with that, but let's say I'm a bad guesser, and I put it down here. I go that distance once, slide it, that distance twice, and now I'm going to extend it up parallel to what I measured off of. I measured off of here. So opposite of where you have those dots going. And then I have my two lines. I just extend them, keep extending them until they cross. And where they cross, that's right where the dot is. Erase all of the rest of it. So we're just trying to find where they would intersect, and then we know our line. And then that's where you're going to go ahead and you're going to look at the shape of the line, and it bends down a little bit more right there. And then you're done with that line and you know that it's accurate and you didn't have to use a grid. I'm going to do all of these dots with you. If you already know how to measure and plot, great. Do it. Do it right now. And then if you don't, you're continuing on with this demonstration. By the time that I'm done, you guys should be done. I'm going to demonstrate the eyelashes after the dots. But again, if you know what you're doing, just go ahead and go ahead of me. That's fine. So I'm going to start with the corner of the eye, and I'm deciding, do I want to measure from here to here? And then from there to there. I always go that shorter two distances, but you can do whatever you want. So if I'm going this way to this way, the difference is I'd be marking it from this side and then lining it up on this side if I was going this direction. If I was going from this direction and marking it on this side, then I would have to start over here and go 1, 2. So one direction side to side and one direction up or down. I put the tip of the paper right in the center of the dot. I mark the edge of the box. And then I line it back up anywhere on this line, but the mark has to be lined up. And I go that distance once, and that distance twice. On the second mark, I'm extending it parallel to what I measured from, that side of the paper. And the first dot means nothing anymore, just helping me get to my second dot. I keep using the same strip, and so you can cut these up, you know, when we get to those projects and stuff. Cut a bunch of them, have them inside of your bag, ready to go for whenever you need them. The tip of the paper, middle of the dot, I mark the box. And then I just have to always remember, line it back up on the box. And I go that distance once, that distance twice. On the second mark, I extend it out, parallel, which means the same direction as what I measured from. Wherever they cross, that's right where the dot would be. If you were doing this for real on one of your projects, you wouldn't want to have giant dots like I'm having. You wouldn't be wanting to draw as dark as I'm drawing. This is also, you can see it pretty good inside of the demonstration. So now I have that one done, so I'm going to go up to this one up here. Some kids get confused about this dot is for the crease. So the one that's given is for the crease above the eye, and then you had to find your own dot that would be below the eye. So just don't get confused on that part of the worksheet. So now on this one, I'm going to measure this way and this way. And again, you don't have to draw those lines on there. It's just so you can see that I have to do 2 ways. Tip of the paper on the dot. If you're confused, you can jump in at any time. Drag it down, line it up somewhere on this line, and I go that distance once, that distance twice. Second dot, all I have to do is, like, remember, I'm going to extend it parallel to what I measured from, goes this way. Not in line with those. And then I turn my paper and measure it the other way. Can flip my measuring stick, or if you only have a giant sheet of paper, you can just fold your paper over and use it that way. You know, whatever, it doesn't matter. So if I have my giant paper and that's all you have because you don't own scissors, then I do the same thing. Tip of paper, mark the edge of the box. I go that distance once, that distance twice. Wherever they cross, that's right where the dot is. I'm going to kind of erase these as I go. And remember, you'd be doing this so lightly that none of this would really be showing. Once I have that second dot, I'm really going to look at, when you're drawing an eye, it's more of a horseshoe shape down here. It's not a point. So make sure that you draw it like a horseshoe. And then I'm going to play connect the dot. I'm looking at the shape of the line between the two. Eventually, you have to put your own dots on your own paper, right? So you're going to have your own photo of your own choice, and you got to decide, where am I going to put these dots? And so you put them at the most important parts, like the ends of things. You put it at intersections where this and this come together. What you would not do is be the crazy kid. And so that is the kid that is like, I want this to be 100% accurate. And so I'm going to go above and beyond. I'm going to put a dot here and a dot here and a dot here and a dot there. Well, you don't need those because you can easily guess what that shape is. It's not that much of a curve, right? But if I only had a dot here and a dot here, and I had this entire shape to do, that's kind of a lot of guessing. And so I want to know where that curve is, and that's why I threw another dot in right here. And so if you need to go a distance and say, okay, maybe I do need a dot on a curve, but don't go dot, 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 dot on your reference photo. Okay, next one. Sometimes on my measuring stick, I like to just kind of fold it and get a clean edge again. So you're not getting a new measuring stick every single time. So now I'm going to measure how far over it is. I'll draw the line so that you guys can see the directions that I'm going. Tip of the paper in the center of the dot. Mark the edge of the box. This time the mark is on this side. I go that distance once, that distance twice. On that second mark, I extended up vertically because I measured off of that line. And then I need to measure how far down it is. And I go that distance once, that distance twice. Wherever they collide, that's right where my dot is. And then I can draw that very, 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 very slight curve. Erase all of my excess. Once you get good at this, you can do it so fast and you can get your whole drawing done like in an hour. With a grid drawing, you have to spend, at least the hour to put the grid on the drawing, another hour to put it onto the paper, the reference photo, and you haven't even started drawing yet. And then it gets too dark, it gets messy, and then it looks bad. Because if you can see a grid, people know what you did, and it just looks like a disaster. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the corner of the eye, and I'm going to measure how far down and over it is there. Mark the edge of the page. And then I'm going that distance once, that distance twice. On the second mark, I am extending it vertically because I measured from the vertical line. Now I'm measuring how high it is from the horizontal line. That distance once, that distance twice. It crosses right there. Erase everything else but that. And then it's easier if you draw with the motion of your hand naturally curves this way. So you would probably flip the paper when you're drawing that kind of a curve so that you can do it like this. It's not natural to draw a curve like this. But I don't want to flip my paper around because I don't want to confuse you guys. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just work my way all the way around the eye. How high up is that? How far in is that? Gonna go how high up it is this time first. Other kids are like, do you measure how high up it is or how far in it is? It doesn't matter. Just one way first and the other way next. 2. Extend it parallel to what I measured from. Cross off my old mark. Tip of the paper on the dot. And I go that distance once, that distance twice. I extend this parallel to the side I measured off of, and there's my dot. Then I look at the shape of the paper, draw that, and we are so close to being done with this for the contour line. Gonna go ahead and measure how high up and how far in it is. Mark it. So you should be getting used to this whole, hopefully this presentation is so boring to you because then you're like, I know what I'm doing. 1, 2. On the second dot, I extend it vertically. Measure how high up it is. Go 1, 2. Extend it horizontally because I measured from the horizontal line. I think I was off a little bit. That dot, if you look at it on the drawing, is a little bit too high. So maybe when you do that one, kind of drop that down a little bit lower. And then I look at this curve, it curves up and then it curves back down. And then when it comes to drawing the colored part of the eye, the normal colored part of the eye, the brown or blue part or green, I would start with my curve. And again, my hand curves naturally this way. So that's nice, right? That's going to help me get like a nice flow. When I try to do this side, if I didn't rotate the paper again, it's like so unnatural to try to do a curve this way instead of this way. you want to double check your accuracy on this one by looking at the negative space. And so the most negative space would be the whites of the eyes. So most of you would look at this circle, but you might not have looked at this triangle. And I look at the shape of this. See how this kind of white part cuts in, and this one doesn't cut in quite as much? And then check, do you have yours cutting in at that same kind of a shape? And then maybe it's not cutting in as much. So this is more acute of an angle. This is still acute, but not quite as acute as that angle, if we were talking math terms. So this is more like squished, and this one's a little bit more wide. We only have 2 more dots to do. Let's go ahead and do the pupil. So I'm measuring how far over it is. You could be doing this with your pencil or that folded sheet of paper. Measure how far in it is. 1, 2. Make sure. I kind of did that fast. Sorry. 1, 2. Extend it out. And then measure how far down it is. And remember, every time I'm measuring, I'm just marking it on the box, the edge of the picture, and then I'm relining it up on the edge of the box. 1, 2. Extend that out parallel to this side. And then it looks a little bit off. So if I was to put this on, I'm going to try to shift it just a little bit because I don't want it to be, I don't want to have a smaller gap and then a wider gap. I want it to be kind of centered. And then you can go back through and erase all that excess as you go. Remember, you guys are drawing much lighter than I'm drawing because I'm doing a demonstration. And so I want it to be able to show on the camera. The last thing we have to draw is this, I call it the eyelid flap. I don't know what to call it. Someone said that it's the tight line. She was into makeup, and so you can call it the tight line. But when you look at someone's eye, almost all of the time, either you would see the thickness of the skin on the bottom or the top, depending on your point of view. If you forget to draw this, your eyes will not look that great. And so from here on out, always make it a point when you're drawing to look for that in your photographs that you're drawing. So this last one is going to be the end of the thickness of the skin, the tight line, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to measure how far over it is. And it's 1, 2. Mark it vertical because we were on the vertical line. Scratch out that first dot. Mark how high up it is. 1, 2. Extend it where it crosses. That's right where that would be. And the way that you would do this is you would come out and then you just wrap it around. And then if it disappears, it just disappears. And so it kind of disappears there. So your line is going to kind of end right there. And then at this point, while we're waiting for everybody else to get caught up, erase all of your little dots that are along the way. Hopefully they're not as giant as mine. Kind of fix that up a little bit. Okay, eyelashes, what you do or don't want to do, this is what you don't want to do. A lot of kids will just all of a sudden, you don't want to draw out of your head. The more that you draw what you see, the better of an artist you're going to be. And a lot of that is you turning off what you imagine in your head to be like the stereotype. So a stereotype of what eyelashes are. And so a lot of kids will stop, for some reason when it comes to eyelashes, they'll stop looking at the information that's given and they just start going off of their imaginations and all get like crazy stuff like this all the time. So first of all, they are not identically lined up and they're not evenly spaced out. They all have their own unique characteristics. So you don't want to do this. You want to go back to the original and you want to really analyze it and pick out every single eyelash. So if we started here and we're looking at this, you notice how they're shorter here and then they get taller there. You also want to analyze how tall are they? How much farther past this line are they going? how close to the border of the box are these going? And so look at the distances in relationship to other things that are on the page. And so for this first eyelash, I can come out about here, guess where that is, and then I'm going to draw that one. And then I'm going to draw the one that kind of comes into this area. Look at the angle. And notice how the angles shift. They're turning that way, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like a clock. They're turning this way. And so once I have these two in there, I'm going to look at what's happening in between them. And I see one kind of coming down, and I see it kind of coming up, and there's like a gap between those two. And they're a little bit thicker at the bottom, so I could thicken up the eyelashes towards the bottom. And then I have one that dips into this space completely. And I'm just trying to fill in these spaces with the eyelashes that I see. And then I recheck, am I making them long enough? And it's kind of hard to see where this one ends because of the shading, but that's okay. And then I'm going to move on to like the next set. So this is like a big lump of them. So I'm going to kind of put several of them together. And then this one really shoots up pretty high, and it goes up to that point, and it's like a teepee. When I do eyelashes, and if you have to do eyelashes from your head because you're doing some sort of character, teepees are really, really good to use. And so let me show you, like here, it kind of looks like, this, and then it comes back down. And that just shows how the eyelashes are kind of sticking together. And then I'm just going to work on the ones that are really dominant, and I know where they're at. So here we have this one kind of coming out past that line of the crease, and then you have this one kind of coming out and crossing over, but they're thicker at the bottom. And then I would go back in and I'd fill these in. I would say, okay, between these. So you're really looking at every shape. You're letting that information into your head, and you're transferring it. You are not doing this automatic crazy eyelash thing. The other mistake that kids make is the gap, that thickness of your skin, that tight line. The eyelashes grow out of the bottom of that, not on this top line, but on the bottom line. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to say, okay, the very first one is really small, and then they kind of come out, you know, like this, and then, but they're all growing from this line. So there's a lot of things that you need to think about when you're shading. And the more that you think about this, the better technique you'll have when you do shade. So I guess we'll start here. You should always have a piece of paper underneath your hand when you shade, because you don't want your hand to smudge, or the oils that are constantly seeping from your skin to get on your paper, because that messes it up, and when you shade it gets like oily gross. It's just gross. Put your drawing paper on a stack of other papers to kind of cradle the paper, and it helps you get more smooth that way. You don't want to shade with a dull pencil or the pencil too low at an angle, because you get that bumpy texture. So if I was to do that here, like you can see all of those bumps, and those bumps happen because the paper gets darker where it hits on a ridge, and then the valleys never get shaded in. So if I have my pencil up at a high angle, when you're shading, it's going in between all of these cracks, and it keeps it a lot more even. So sharp pencil up at a 45-degree angle when you shade. You want to shade in this pattern or this pattern, not lines and not ovals, because the lines will show up. Imagine this as someone's forehead, and you're shading back and forth in lines, and you're trying to get it smooth. You don't have like consistent pressure, and so all of a sudden, if you do like a darker line, and it could be even just subtly darker, all of a sudden you have a bunch of lines like going all the way across that nice smooth area. Same thing with ovals. If I do like ovals like that, it's gonna look like a bunch of lines. So you want to do this random pattern or this circly pattern, because if you have an inconsistent pressure, it'll look like a blemish instead of a bunch of lines together. And you want to do it not this big, you want to do it like super small. And then you want to do it randomly, instead of in rows because rows will show up. So I'm gonna zoom in and show you how to shade. But if you want to shade lightly, you can hold your paper up in the air so that you don't have pressure. You can crinkle up a piece of paper underneath your drawing. You can hold the pencil at the tip and then draw like that. So I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. I'm gonna show you, or I guess maybe that's enough. So if I'm drawing like this and I have my separator paper underneath my hand and I'm shading, if I'm shading too low, it's going to get all bumpy and gross. And so I normally just have my hand underneath my other hand to get a higher angle. If I want to shade light, I hold it farther away. Think of it like a musical instrument. And so I am shading in that random pattern. And I know you can't really see anything because I'm purposely trying to make it light. The farther I hold my pencil down, the more pressure my hand has on it and the darker my value would be. So if I was shading that same amount, trying to stay as light as I was, do you see how much darker that gets? And then I don't want to do this in rows because this is what rows will look like. It just looks like a bunch of shading in rows. So I would start, so I'm going to hold this back out. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Here, I'll go right here. I'm starting either with that circly pattern that's like this. It's like kind of like a bunch of like flowery circly patterns. And then I work my way out and I revisit and I work my way out and I revisit. And I revisit it enough times until that area looks perfectly smooth. If it doesn't look smooth, you didn't revisit enough. And then I go a different direction and I revisit. And you don't want to get too quick with this because if you try to go back and, like, say I just did some circles and I didn't revisit, trying to go back and match that value later is going to be hard. And so some kids will end up with something like this. So I'll make it darker so you can see. So I'll have that random scribbly pattern, and you would be doing it smaller though, okay? And then they go back, so obviously that doesn't look smooth. And then they're like, okay, I'll go back and revisit later. But then maybe they have a harder pressure, and now it just looks like circles on top of circles. And that looks bad. So let me do it at a value you can see. So it'd be nice and small. And then I come out and I revisit. I go out and I revisit. And then if it starts to look bumpy, I rotate my pencil so I get the sharper point so I can get inside of the grooves of the paper. I go out and I revisit. Out and revisit.